My friend's mom laughed, "This is wrong." I smiled back, "That's what makes it fun." It was one of those warm, lazy Saturdays when my best friend had invited me over just to hang out, no plans, no pressure, just a quiet afternoon of board games, snacks, and music. I hadn't expected to notice much beyond our usual banter, but the moment I stepped into the kitchen, she was there, my friend's mom. She moved with a kind of graceful ease that made the sunlight streaming through the window catch her hair in a halo of soft gold. There was a casual elegance about her that was impossible to ignore, the way her cardigan hung just so over her shoulders, the gentle curve of her smile, the quiet strength in her posture. She glanced up, noticed me standing there, and her laughter, a soft, melodious sound, filled the kitchen. It wasn't just polite laughter, it was warm, inviting, and slightly mischievous, the kind of laugh that made the edges of a moment feel lighter. I found myself lingering on it, caught off guard by how easily her presence pulled my attention. As she reached for a cup of coffee, her fingers brushed the countertop lightly, and my eyes followed the motion almost instinctively. There was something in the way she moved, natural, confident, unself-conscious, that stirred a strange mix of admiration and curiosity in me. I noticed the little things, the tilt of her head when she spoke, the gentle crinkle around her eyes when she smiled, the faint, comforting scent of vanilla and something uniquely her own. I felt a twinge of hesitation, too, the silent acknowledgement of the social boundary I was aware of but hadn't expected to notice so strongly. After all, she was my friend's mother. Yet the intrigue was undeniable. Something about her presence felt different from anyone else I'd met, there was warmth, but also a quiet hint of playful rebellion in her eyes, a spark that seemed to say she enjoyed the small, unexpected moments life had to offer. I busied myself with grabbing a soda, trying to act casual, but I couldn't help sneaking glances at her as she moved around the room. She caught me once and raised an eyebrow, a teasing grin tugging at the corner of her lips, as if she already knew I was observing her, yet chose to let the moment linger. My chest tightened slightly, not with guilt, not exactly, but with the electric thrill of noticing something I wasn't supposed to. That afternoon, the simple warmth of sunlight and laughter wrapped around us, creating a quiet space where curiosity and attraction began to stir. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like the first brush of a breeze before a storm. And in that soft, suspended moment, I realized something unexpected. I was fascinated by her, and this fascination, delightfully forbidden, was only just beginning to take hold. The living room smelled faintly of popcorn and old books, the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through sheer curtains. We had settled into a casual board game night, just my best friend, me, and, unexpectedly, his mom, who had wandered in with a mischievous smile and a twinkle in her eyes. She perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture relaxed but unmistakably poised, like someone who knew exactly how to occupy a space without demanding attention, and yet somehow commanding it all the same. The game began with easy laughter, playful jabs, and the kind of casual competitiveness that comes from friends who know each other too well. But it quickly became clear that she wasn't just there as an observer. She teased me effortlessly, her humor light but sharp, pointing out my overly cautious moves with a mock severity that made me grin despite myself. "You play as if the stakes are life or death," she said, shaking her head with a laugh that seemed to linger just a fraction too long. As I reached for a game piece, our fingers brushed lightly, barely a touch, but enough to make my pulse skip. I felt warmth radiate from her skin, a fleeting but undeniable spark, and my attention wavered. I caught her eyes, and there was something in that glance, amused, curious, almost knowing, that made me both aware of the boundary and secretly thrilled by its presence. The tension was subtle, playful, entirely unspoken, but the electricity of that brief contact hummed quietly in the space between us. Her laughter drew me in further, not just because of its sound, but because of the way her entire presence seemed to invite connection. The tilt of her head, the slight arch of her eyebrow, the way her shoulders relaxed when she smiled, all of it spoke of a woman confident in herself yet approachable, warm yet teasing. I found myself matching her humor, leaning into the playful banter, my words carefully walking the line between cheeky and respectful. There was an unspoken rhythm forming, a delicate dance of teasing and observation. Every glance, every accidental touch, carried the weight of curiosity and silent acknowledgement. I was aware of it, she was aware of it, and yet we both let it happen, letting the tension simmer beneath the surface without ever naming it. By the time the game ended, I realized that something had shifted. The attraction was no longer just a fleeting thought, it had settled into the quiet corners of my mind, a subtle pulse of anticipation I couldn't ignore. The playful exchange had done more than break the ice, it had opened a door, the first gentle step into a connection that was as forbidden as it was magnetic. And as she laughed one last time, glancing my way with that same knowing sparkle, I felt the undeniable thrill of something just beginning to stir, an invisible thread pulling us closer, despite all the reasons it probably shouldn't. Later that evening, the house had settled into a comfortable hush. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft amber glow in the living room, and the faint hum of the refrigerator mingled with the occasional distant bark of a dog outside. My friend had gone upstairs to grab something, leaving the room to just the two of us. It was the kind of quiet moment that felt accidental but somehow necessary, like the universe had conspired to create a space where conversation could flow freely. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, and I found myself sitting across from her, unsure of why I had lingered. But the curiosity I felt earlier had deepened into something subtler, more magnetic. She spoke softly, her voice carrying an ease that made it feel intimate even in its simplicity. She shared small stories of her life, childhood memories, a brief anecdote about a trip she'd taken, challenges she'd faced, and the quiet victories that had shaped her. Each word seemed measured yet genuine, inviting trust without demanding it. I listened intently, noticing details I had never before paid attention to. The way her fingers curled around the mug, the slight tremor when she laughed at her own story, the softness in her eyes when she reflected on a memory. I was aware of every subtle movement, the tilt of her head, the flicker of her smile, the way her shoulders relaxed when she grew comfortable. There was a warmth in the room, a slow, grounding presence that made my heartbeat feel oddly synchronized with hers, though I was keenly aware of the social line I wasn't supposed to cross. As she spoke, I realized I was drawn not just to her beauty or confidence, but to the quiet vulnerability beneath it. There was a depth to her that invited observation, that encouraged me to notice the small, human moments that revealed who she truly was. I found myself leaning in slightly, not consciously, just instinctively, caught in the gravity of her presence. Each glance we shared felt laden with unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement that we were aware of each other's attention. In that room, with the fading sunlight casting gentle shadows across her face, I felt an unspoken bond forming, a subtle tension layered with curiosity and the quiet thrill of discovery. I knew the attraction was more than surface level, it was rooted in admiration, respect, and the magnetic pull of someone who existed beyond the boundaries of familiarity. By the time my friend returned, the moment had passed, but the impression lingered. The quiet connection, the subtle closeness, had planted a seed, a fragile yet undeniable spark. I realized that this slow, unassuming fascination with her was no fleeting thought. It was something that would grow, layer by layer, into a delicate tension that neither of us could ignore. And in that gentle, ordinary evening, I understood that the real journey was just beginning. A few days later, the air felt different in the house, charged with a quiet energy I couldn't ignore. My friend had gone to run errands, leaving the two of us alone again. We were tidying up after a casual movie night, stacking cups and folding blankets, when a small accident changed everything. She had leaned over to pick up a cushion that had slipped from the sofa, and her foot caught awkwardly on the rug. Without thinking, I stepped forward to steady her, my hands brushing lightly against her waist. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a jolt through me, an electric thrill that made my chest tighten and my pulse quicken. I could feel the warmth of her body as she steadied herself, and for a brief moment, our faces were closer than usual. She laughed softly, a sound both amused and slightly breathless, and muttered, "You know, you really shouldn't be hovering like that." Her eyes sparkled with a mix of teasing and something deeper, something unspoken. It was in that split second, that almost imperceptible pause, that the tension between us surged. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat on my arm, not because she needed support, but because she chose to, and the intimacy of that small gesture hit me with surprising force. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the warmth of her skin beneath my fingers, and the slight tilt of her head as she studied me. Everything about that brief, accidental closeness felt deliberate in its emotional weight, and I realized I was acutely aware of every sensation. We laughed to break the moment, our voices slightly louder than necessary, but there was no mistaking the electricity that hummed in the air. Every glance now seemed loaded, every gesture magnified, and I felt myself walking a line between admiration, curiosity, and a magnetic pull I couldn't name. She, too, seemed aware, her playful teasing now carrying an undercurrent of something tender, something almost vulnerable. After a moment, she stepped back, smoothing her hair and smiling at me with that same knowing look. It was fleeting, but it lingered in my mind long after. That small accident, so ordinary, so banal, had shifted something fundamental between us. The playful energy we had shared before now carried weight, a tension neither of us could ignore. I left that evening with a head full of thoughts and a heart that felt heavier yet lighter at the same time. The tension was real, undeniable, and thrilling. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was curiosity, desire, and the promise of something deeper. And for the first time, I realized that the line between fun and forbidden wasn't as clear as I had thought. The following evening, the house felt quieter than usual, a soft hush settling over the rooms as dusk painted the walls in shades of amber and rose. We had drifted into the kitchen for a cup of tea, the clinking of mugs and the faint scent of chamomile creating a domestic, comforting atmosphere. She leaned casually against the counter, one hand wrapped around her cup, and gave me a look that was equal parts amused and knowing. We fell into playful banter almost effortlessly. She teased me about my careful, calculated way of handling everything, from making tea to opening the cupboard. "You think everything needs a plan," she said, raising an eyebrow with a smirk. I countered with a grin, leaning a little closer, and yet here you are, laughing at me for it. The humor in our exchange was easy, natural, but beneath it ran a quiet, undeniable tension, one that neither of us tried to name but both clearly felt. Then she laughed at something small I did, a minor slip of the hand while pouring tea, and it was impossible not to respond in kind. Without thinking, I said with a half-smile, "That's what makes it fun." The words hung in the air, playful yet tinged with meaning, and I saw her pause, her expression softening as her eyes met mine. For a moment, the teasing stopped, and there was a silence thick with something neither of us had admitted. Her lips curved into a gentle, slightly mischievous smile, and she shook her head, laughing softly. "This is wrong," she said, her tone light but carrying the subtle weight of awareness, the acknowledgement of the unspoken boundary between us. And yet, in the same instant, there was no tension in her warmth, no judgment, only the quiet, magnetic pull of mutual curiosity and understanding. In that small, suspended moment, humor became our language of confession. We were daring to acknowledge the attraction, the thrill of what should not be, without ever putting it into words that might frighten or confuse. The glance we shared lingered a fraction longer than necessary, our shoulders brushing lightly as we moved to clear the counter, the faint warmth of touch leaving a lingering sense of closeness. I realized then that this playful exchange was more than simple teasing, it was a bridge, a way for both of us to admit the tension we felt while maintaining the safety of laughter. Humor had become the conduit for vulnerability, and the spark between us had grown brighter. It was a delicate balance, thrilling and forbidden, yet deeply human. And as the evening drew on, I understood that this subtle dance, the careful weaving of fun, teasing, and unspoken desire, was leading us closer to something neither of us could deny. The night had settled into a calm quiet, the kind that makes the world feel smaller, more intimate. We were sitting in the living room, the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the house the only sounds besides the soft clink of teacups. Outside, the distant glow of streetlights painted faint patterns on the curtains. It was in this peaceful, almost sacred space that she allowed herself to let down her guard in a way I had not seen before. She began to speak quietly, sharing a story from her past, a regret she had carried, a difficult decision, and the lessons she had learned from it. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying both strength and a vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the weight behind them, the unspoken emotions woven into every pause, every slight gesture. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, and I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders easing as she spoke. I found myself leaning in slightly, not consciously, but instinctively drawn toward her presence. The warmth of the tea in my hands was comforting, but it was nothing compared to the warmth radiating from her nearby, the steady, human presence that made the space between us feel charged, yet safe. She glanced at me occasionally, her eyes meeting mine in quiet acknowledgement, as if inviting me into her thoughts without needing words to explain. At one point, when her story touched on a particularly tender moment, I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingers lightly over her hand. She allowed the touch, and the brief connection was grounding, silent yet intensely intimate. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat, the warmth and slight pressure of it sending a comforting current through me. In that contact, there was no pressure, no expectation, just the shared human connection of two people letting themselves be seen. We spoke little after that, but the silence was not empty, it was filled with understanding. The tension that had once simmered playfully between us now deepened into something richer, layered with trust and emotional closeness. I felt the attraction that had begun with teasing and curiosity transform into admiration and genuine care. I realized that this connection, both thrilling and delicate, was about more than just a playful spark, it was about truly seeing one another and being seen in return. As the night drew on, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me, this relationship, however unconventional or unexpected, was meaningful. The boundaries we had navigated with humor and teasing now felt more human, more real. And in that warmth, that mutual vulnerability, I understood that our bond had grown into something neither of us could ignore, a quiet, emotional intimacy that promised depth, connection, and the possibility of something lasting. The weekend was drawing to a close, and the house had taken on a quiet, comforting rhythm. Evening shadows stretched across the living room, softening the lines of the furniture and painting the space in warm, amber tones. My friend had gone out for a short errand, leaving us alone once more, a rare pocket of time that felt suspended, almost sacred. We sat together on the sofa, a small distance between us, yet the energy in the room hummed with the subtle tension that had been building all weekend. There was no need for words at first, the silence itself carried meaning. I noticed the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her fingers traced the rim of her mug, and the faint glimmer in her eyes as they met mine. Every movement was loaded with quiet awareness, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection we had been cultivating. As I shifted slightly, our hands brushed, a fleeting touch that lingered longer than casual, and we both smiled, acknowledging the moment without speaking it aloud. It was a gentle, grounding warmth, the kind that settles in your chest and leaves a quiet, fluttering thrill. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine, and I felt the subtle weight of her presence, comforting and intimate. The closeness was deliberate yet natural, a slow, gentle progression of the bond we had carefully nurtured. "I guess, weekends like this are dangerous," she said softly, her lips curving into a playful yet tender smile. Her voice carried a warmth that made my chest tighten in that familiar, quiet way. I laughed lightly, my own voice betraying the mix of amusement and longing I felt. "Dangerous how?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, our connection, unexpected and forbidden, yet impossible to ignore. Her laughter was soft, genuine, and filled the room with the familiar magnetic energy that had drawn me in from the very first moment. "Because it's fun," she admitted, her eyes lingering on mine with an honesty that both thrilled and calmed me. In that simple exchange, everything we had been dancing around, the tension, the curiosity, the warmth, found a gentle, satisfying resolution. When the time came to part, the farewell was quiet but meaningful. She hugged me, her arms slipping lightly around my waist, her cheek resting gently against my chest. The warmth, the heartbeat, the brief closeness, it was grounding, tender, and entirely human. I lingered for a moment longer than necessary, savoring the connection before stepping back. Our eyes met one last time, and in that gaze was everything unspoken: understanding, attraction, trust, and the promise of more moments like this. As I left, I carried the warmth of that weekend with me. The story of curiosity, playful teasing, and emotional intimacy had found its conclusion, not in explosive declarations, but in subtle, enduring connection. The tension had resolved, the boundaries had been respected, and the attraction, though quietly simmering, left both of us fulfilled and content. It was the perfect ending for a story that had begun with a spark and grown into something tender, meaningful, and entirely unforgettable. If this slow-burn story of curiosity, playful tension, and forbidden attraction left your heart racing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. More age gap romance stories with warm, emotional twists are coming soon. Stay tuned for the next chapter of love that's unexpected, irresistible, and unforgettable.